Okay, guys. Sorry, I was having a little technical difficulties there. Hopefully, you guys can hear me, and we'll just make sure to confirm that. But we will be continuing to read the ancient fragments. This time it'll be Chaldea. Oh, can't hear anything? Hear anything now? Okay, I think the sound's back. Yeah, I think it is. There we go. Okay. All right, good. Thank you very much, Philip. I appreciate that. All right, so let's get into this here. I'm going to share the screen with you guys. And nope, that's not it. There we go. Okay, so the fragments of Chaldean history from Berossus, Abydos, and Megathenes. This is going to be pretty interesting. All right, so let me just put on my headphones here. Yeah. Okay, so of the Chaldean kings, this is the history which Berosus has transmitted to us. He tells us that the first king was Alurus of Babylon, a Chaldean. He reigned 10 Sari, and afterwards Alaporus and Emelon, who came from Pentabiblon, and Amenon the Chaldean, in whose time appeared the Masurus Oannes, the Anadotus from Erythraean Sea. Interesting. So Oannes is also one of those Phoenician gods as well, who is a sea god. But Alexander Polystor anticipated the event, has said that he appeared in the first year, but Apollodorus says that it was after 40 Sari. Abydos, however, makes the second Anadotus appear after 26 Sari. Excuse me. Then succeeded Megalorus from the city of Pentabiblon, and he reigned 18 Sari, and after him Dionus the shepherd from Pentabiblon reigned 10 Sari, and in his time, he says, appeared again from the Assyrian sea a fourth Anadotus, having the same form with those above, the shape of a fish, blended with that of a man. Then reigned Eudoriscus from Pentabiblon for the term of 18 Sari. That was interesting, huh? In his days, there appeared another personage from the Erythraean Sea, like the former, having the same complicated form between a fish and a man, whose name was Odacon. Of all these, says Apollodorus, related particularly and circumstantially whatever Oannes had formed them of. Concerning these, Abydenus has made no mention. Then reigned Amemsinus, a Chaldean from Laurentiae, and he, being the eighth in order, reigned 10 Sari. Then reigned Artiarchus, the Chaldean from Laurentiae, and he reigned 8 Sari. And upon the death of Artiarchus, his son Xisuthros, who will be coming back here and there, reigned 18 Sari, and in his time happened the great deluge. So that the sum of all the kings is 10, and the term which they collectively reigned 120 Sari. And then Berossus from Abydos, of the Chaldean kings and the deluge, so much concerning the wisdom of the Chaldeans, it is said that the first king of the country was Alurus, who gave the report that he was appointed by God to be the shepherd of the people. He reigned 10 Sari, now a Saris, in esteemed to be 3,600 years, a Neros 600, and a Sosos 60. Interesting. After him, Alaparus reigned 3 Sari. To him succeeded Amalurus from the city of Pentablon, who reigned 13 Sari. In his time, the Samidemon, interesting, called Amadotus, very like to Oannes, again, came up a second time from the sea, and after him mentioned the reign of 12 Sari, who was in the city of Pentabiblon. Then Megalorus of the same place, 18 Sari. Then Daos, the shepherd, governed the space of 10 Sari, and he was of Pentabiblon of his time. 4 double-shaped personages came out of the sea to land, whose names were Euacodos, and Nugamus, and Nubulus, and Enametus. After these things was Anodaphus in the time of Eudoriscus. There were afterwards other kings, and last of all, Sisithris, spelled differently, so that in the whole the number amounted to 10 kings, and the term of their reigns to 120 Sari. And among other things, not irrelative to the subject, he continues, thus concerning the deluge. And a smiley face, look at that. After Eudoriscus, some others reigned, and then Xisthus. To him the deity Cronus foretold that on the 15th day of the month, Decius, there would be a deluge, and commanded him to deposit all the writings, whatever that he had, in the city of the sun in Siapara. Xisthus, then he had complied with these commands, instantly sailed to Armenia, and was immediately inspired by God. During the prevalence of the waters, Xisthus sent out birds, that he might judge if the flood had subsided. What does that sound like? But the birds, passing over an unbounded sea and not finding any place of rest, returned again to Xisthus. This he repeated, and when upon the third trial he succeeded, for they returned with their feet stained with mud. The gods translated him from among men. With respect to the vessel, which yet remains in Armenia, it is a custom of the inhabitants to form bracelets and amulets of its wood. How interesting. And here we go, the Chaldean version of the Tower of Babel. They say the first inhabitants of the earth, glorifying in their own strength and size, despising the gods, undertook to raise a tower whose top should reach the sky, where Babylon now stands. But when it approached the heaven, the winds assisted the gods and overturned the work upon its contrivers, and its ruins are said to be at Babylon. And the gods introduced a diversity of tongues among men, who still at that time had all spoken the same language. And a war arose between Cronus and Titan, but the place in which they built the tower is now called Babylon, on account of the confusion of the tongues, for confusion is by the Hebrews called Babel. And this is from Eusebius, so keep that in mind. Yes, he's giving us fragments of these old Chaldean stuff, but he essentially put a lot of these together to more or less discredit a lot of these things. So he leaves things out, I'm almost positive. But it's a pretty interesting story. Sounds just like the Noah flood story, right? Here we go. Berosus from Alexander Polyhistor of the Cosmogony of Oannes and the Deluge. Berosus, in his first book concerning the history of Babylonia, informs us that he lived in the time of Alexander the son of Philip. And he mentions that there were written accounts preserved at Babylon with the greatest care, comprehending a term of 15 myriad of years. These writings contain a history of the heavens and the sea, and of the birth of mankind, also of those who had sovereign rule, and of the actions achieved by them. And in the first place, he describes Babylonia as a country which lay between the Tigris and Euphrates. He mentions that it abounded with wheat, barley, ochros, sesamum, and in the lakes were found the roots called gunje, which were good to be eaten and were in respect to nutrient like barley. There were also palm trees and apples, and most kinds of fruit, fish too, and birds, both which are merely of flight, and those which take to the element of water. The part of Babylonia which is bordered upon Arabia was barren and without water, but that which lay on the other side had hills and was fruitful. At Babylon there was in these times a great resort of people of various nations who inhabited Chaldea, and lived without rule and order like the beast of the field. In the first year there made its appearance from a part of the Erythraean Sea, which bordered upon Babylonia, an animal endowed with reason, who was called Oannes, according to the account of Apollodorus. The whole body of the animal was like that of a fish, and had under a fish's head another head, and also feet below, similar to those of a man, subjoined to the fish's tail. He had a voice too, in a language which was articulate and human, and a representation of him is preserved even to this day. This being in the daytime used to converse with men, but took no food at that season, and he gave them an insight into letters and sciences and every kind of art. He taught them to construct houses, to found temples, to compile laws, and explain to them the principles of geometric knowledge. He made them distinguish the seeds of the earth, and shown them how to collect fruits. In short, he instructed them in everything which could tend to soften manners and humanize mankind. From that time, so universal was his instructions, nothing has been added material by way of improvement. When the sun set, it was the custom of this being to plunge again into the sea and abide all night in the deep. He was amphibious. Wow, sounds like sounds like a mermaid. Excuse me. After this, there appeared other animals like Oannes, of which Berossus promises to give an account when he comes to the history of the kings. Moreover, Oannes wrote concerning the generation of mankind, of their different ways of life, and of their civil polity, and following is the purport of what he said. Quoting from Oannes, there was a time in which there was nothing but darkness and an abyss of waters, wherein resided most hideous beings, which were produced of a twofold principle. Pay attention. Men appeared with two wings, some with four, and with two faces. They had one body, but two heads, the one of a man and the other of a woman. They were likewise in their several organs both male and female. Other human figures were to be seen with the legs and horns of goats. Some had horses' feet, others had the limbs of a horse behind. But before were fashioned like men, resembling hippo-centaurs, bulls likewise bred there with the heads of men, and dogs with fourfold bodies, and the tails of fishes. Also horses with the heads of dogs, men too, and other animals with the heads of bodies of horses and the tails of fishes. In short, there were creatures with the limbs of every species of animals. Add to these fishes, reptiles, serpents, with other wonderful animals which assumed each other's shapes and countenance. Of all these were preserved delineations in the temple of Belus at Babylon. Sounds like a lot of like the Egyptian style gods, doesn't it too? The person who was supposed to have presided over them was a woman named Omoroka, which in the Chaldean language is Talat. Yes, Talat, which the Greeks express Thalassa, the sea. But according to the most true computation, it is equivalent to Selene, the moon. All things being in this situation, Belus came and cut the woman asunder, and out of one half of her he formed the earth, and of that other half the heavens, and at the same time destroyed the animals in the abyss. Oh, those animals also sound like chimeric animals, don't they? All this, he says, was an allegorical description of nature. For the whole universe, consisting of moisture, the animals being continually generated therein, the deity Belus, above mentioned, cut off his own head, upon which the other gods mixed the blood as it gushed out with the earth, and from thence men were formed. Well, at least they say it's allegorical. On this account, it is that they are rational and partake of divine knowledge. This Belus, whom men called Dis, divided the darkness and separated the heavens from the earth, and reduced the universe to order. But the animals so lately created, not being able to bear the prevalence of light, died. Belus, upon this, seeing a vast space of quiet uninhabited, though by nature very fruitful, ordered one of the gods to take off his head, and when it was taken off, they were to mix the blood with the soil of the earth, and from thence to form other men and animals which should be capable of bearing the light. Belus also formed the stars and the sun and the moon, together with the 5 planets. And the second book was the history of the 10 kings of the Chaldeans and the periods of each reign, which consists collectively of 120 sari, or 432,000 years. Wow. These people must have really lived a long time, reaching to the time of the deluge. For Alexander, as the writings of the Chaldeans, enumerating the kings from the 9th Ardates to Xisthus, who is called by them the 10th, proceeds in this manner. Okay. It's the story again, huh? All right. After the death of Ardatus, his son Xisthus succeeded and reigned 18 sari. In his time happened the great deluge, and the history of which is given in this manner. Okay, there you go. The deity Cronus appeared to him in a vision and gave him notice that upon the 15th day of the month Dacia, there would be a flood by which mankind would be destroyed. He therefore enjoined him to commit to writing a history of the beginning procedure and final conclusion of all things down to the present term, and to bury these accounts securely in the city of the sun at Siapara, and build a vessel, and to take with him into it his friends and relations, and to convey on board everything necessary to sustain life, and to take also all the species of animals that either fly or rove upon the earth, and entrust himself to the deep, having asked the deity whither he was to sail, and he was answered, to to the gods, upon which he offered up a prayer for the good of mankind. He opened the divine admonition and built a vessel 5 stadia in length and in breadth 2. Into this he put everything he had got ready, and last of all conveyed into it his wife, children, and friends. After the flood, it had been upon the earth, and was in the time abated. Xisthus sent out some birds from the vessel, which, not finding any food or any place to rest their feet, returned to him again. After an interval of some days, he sent forth a second time, and now they return with their feet tinged with mud. He made a trial a third time with these birds, but they returned to him no more, from whence he formed a judgment that the surface of the earth was now above the waters. Having therefore made an opening in the vessel, and finding upon looking out that the vessel was driven into the side of a mountain, he immediately quitted it, being attended by his wife, his daughter, and the pilot. Interesting. Xisthus immediately paid his adoration to the earth, and having constructed an altar, offered sacrifices to the gods. These things being duly performed, both Xisthus and those who came out of the vessel with him disappeared. They who remained in the vessel, finding that the others did not return, came out with many lamentations and called continually on the name of Xisthus. Him they saw no more, but they could distinguish his voice in the air, and could hear him admonish them to pay due regard to the gods, and likewise inform them that it was upon account of his piety that he was translated to live with the gods, that his wife and daughter with the pilot had obtained the same honor. To this he added that he would have them make the best of their way to Babylonia, and search for the writings in Separia, which were to be made known to all mankind, and that the place where they then were was the land of Armenia. The remainder, having heard these words, offered sacrifices to the gods, and taking a direct circuit, journeyed towards Babylonia. The vessel thus being stranded in Armenia, some part of it yet remains in the Corcrian mountains in Armenia, and the people scrape off bitumen, with which it has been outwardly coated, and make use of it by way of an axclipharmic and amulet. Interesting. In this manner they returned to Babylon, and having found the writings in Sippara, they set about building cities and erecting temples, and Babylon was thus inhabited again. Wow. After the deluge, in the 10th generation, was a certain man among the Chaldeans, renowned for his justice and great exploits, and for his skill in the celestial science. Now this says of Abraham, and I don't, as you notice, there's not there's not like a Greek thing here that says of Abraham. I think this is good old Eusebius who just stuck this here. Okay, I don't think this has to do with Abraham at all, in my opinion. But you guys can decide from yourselves. Here we go, of Nabonassar. From the reign of Nabonassar only are the Chaldeans, from whom the Greek mathematicians copy. Accurately acquainted with the heavenly motions, for Nabonassar collected all the mementos of the kings prior to himself and destroyed them, that the enumeration of the Chaldean kings might commence with him. Of the destruction of, it says, the Jewish temple, but again, like to point out, that is not, this is a title. I mean, maybe it is. Yeah, okay, well, we'll see. The Nabopolassar sent his son to Nabuchodonosor with a great army against Egypt and against Judea, upon his being informed that they had revolted from him. Okay, yeah, okay. Well, there's other histories to corroborate this. And by that means he subdued them all, and set fire to the temple that was at Jerusalem, and removed our people entirely out of their country, and transferred them to Babylon. And it happened that our city was desolate during the interval of 70 years, until the days of Cyrus the king of Persia. He then says that this Babylonian king conquered Egypt and Syria and Phoenicia and Arabia, and exceeded his exploits all that had reigned before him in Babylon and Chaldea. Of Nebuchadnezzar, when Nabopolassar, his Nabuchodonosor's father, heard that the governor whom he had set over Egypt and the parts of Coelesyria and Phoenicia had revolted, he was unable to put up with his delinquencies any longer, but committed certain parts of his army to his son Nabuchodonosor, who was then but young, and sent him against the rebel. And Nabuchodonosor fought with him and conquered him, and reduced the country again under his dominion. And it happened that his father Nabopolassar fell into a distemper at this time, and died in the city of Babylon, after he had reigned 29 years. After a short time, Nebuchadnezzar, receiving the intelligence of his father's death, set the affairs of Egypt and other countries in order and committed the captives he had taken from the Jews and the Phoenicians and Syrians and the nations belonging to Egypt to some of his friends, that they might conduct that part of the forces that had on heavy armor with the rest of his baggage to Babylonia, while he went in haste with a few followers across the desert to Babylon. Where, when he was come, he found that the affairs had been well conducted by the Chaldeans, and that the principal person among them had preserved the kingdom for him. Accordingly, he now obtained possession of all his father's dominions, and he ordered the captives to be distributed in colonies in the most proper places of Babylonia, and adorned the temple of Belus and the other temples in a sumptuous and pious manner, out of the spoils he had taken in this war. He also rebuilt the old city and added another to it on the outside, and so far restored Babylon, that none who should besiege it afterwards might have it in their power to divert the river so as to facilitate an entrance into it, and this he did by building 3 walls about the inner city and 3 about the outer. Sounds like a star fort. Some of these walls he built of burnt brick and bitumen, and some of brick only. When he had thus admirably fortified the city with walls and had magnificently adorned the gates, he added also a new palace to those in which his forefathers had dwelt, adjoining them but exceeding them in height and in its great splendor. It would perhaps require too long a narration if anyone were to describe it. However, as prodigiously large and magnificent as it was finished in 15 days. What? In this place he erected very high walks supported by stone pillars, and by planting what was called a pensile paradise, and replenished it with all sorts of trees, he rendered the prospect of an exact resemblance of a mountainous country. This he did to please his queen, because he had been brought up in Media and was found of a mountainous situation. Pardon me, I'll take a sip. Okay. Of the Chaldean kings after Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar, after he had begun to build the above-mentioned wall, fell sick and departed this life, when he had reigned 43 years, whereupon his evil Merodachus obtained the kingdom. He governed public affairs in an illegal and improper manner. Maybe that's why he's called evil Merodachus. He governed the public affairs in an illegal and improper manner, and by means of a plot laid against him by the Nereglissorus, his sister's husband, and was slain when he had reigned but 2 years. After his death, Nereglissorus, who had conspired against him, succeeded him in the kingdom and reigned 4 years. His son Laborosarchidus, oh my God, these names, obtained the kingdom though he was but a child, and kept it 9 months. But by reason of the evil practices he exhibited, a plot was laid against him by his friends, and he was tormented to death. Oh my God. He was a child, kept it for 9 months. Keep that in mind. After his death, the conspirators assembled, and by common consent put the crown upon the head of Nabonidus, a man of Babylon and one of the leaders of that insurrection. In his reign it was that the walls of the city of Babylon were curiously built with burnt brick and bitumen. But in the 17th year of his reign, Cyrus came out of Persia with a great army, and having conquered all the rest of Asia, he came hastily to Babylonia. When Nebuchadnezzar perceived he was advancing to attack him, he assembled his forces and opposed him, but was defeated, and fled with a few of his attendants, and was shut up in the city Borisipus. Whereupon Cyrus took Babylon, and gave orders that the outer walls should be demolished, because the city had proved very troublesome to him and difficult to take. He then marched to Borisipus to besiege Nebuchadnezzar. But as Nebuchadnezzar delivered himself into his hands without holding out the place, he was at first kindly treated by Cyrus, who gave him an habitation in Carmania, but sent him out of Babylonia. Accordingly, Nebuchadnezzar spent the remainder of his days in that country, and there he died. The feast of Sakia, or Sasia, who knows? Berossus, in the first book of his Babylonian history, says that in the 11th month, called Lus, is celebrated in Babylon the feast of Sasia, or Sakia, for 5 days, in which it is custom that the masters should obey their domestics, one of whom is led around the house, clothed in a royal garment, and him they called Zoganes. Okay, there you go. And now we're going to go into Megasthenes from Abydos. And just like the preface talks about, guys, and you should always, maybe I should have mentioned this in the beginning, but he does mention that, like, we're getting a lot of these from, like, multiple hand-me-downs here. So as much as we're reading this, we really don't know how old any of this stuff is. And as we were reading above with the flood stories and stuff like that, I mean, that sounds so close to the biblical flood stories, but if you look at the official historical chronology, these civilizations definitely precede the Bible by quite a bit of time. So keep that in mind. And this book's got a lot more gems in it. So again, Nebuchadnezzar, Abydos, in his history of the Assyrians, has preserved the following fragment from Megasthenes, who says that Nebuchadnezzar, having become more powerful than Hercules, invaded Libya and Iberia, and when he had rendered them tributary, he extended his conquest over the inhabitants of the shores upon the right of the sea. It is moreover related by the Chaldeans that as he went up into his palace, he was possessed by some god, and he cried out and said, quote, O Babylonians, I, Nebuchadnezzar, foretell unto you a calamity which must shortly come to pass, which neither Belus, my ancestor, or his queen Beltis have power to persuade the fates to turn away. A Persian mule shall come, and by the assistance of your gods shall impose upon you the yoke of slavery, the author of which shall be a Mede, a foolish pride of Assyria. Before he should thus betray my subjects, oh, that some sea or whirlpool might receive him, and his memory be blotted out forever, or that he might be cast out to wander through some desert where there are neither cities nor the trace of men, a solitary exile among rocks and caverns where beasts and birds alone abide. But for me, before he shall have conceived these mischiefs in his mind, a happier end will be provided. Unquote. When he had thus prophesied, he expired, and was succeeded by his son, evil Malchus, who was slain by his kinsman, Nerigalsaurus, and Nerigalsaurus left Labasaurus and his son, and when he had also suffered death by violence, they made Nabonidus king, being no relation to the royal race, and in his reign Cyrus took Babylon and granted him principality in Carmania. Sorry, guys. And concerning the rebuilding of Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar, he writes thus, It is said that from the beginnings all things were water, called the sea Talat, that Belus caused this state of things to cease, and appointed to each its proper place. He surrounded Babylon with a wall, but in process of time this wall disappeared, and Nebuchadnezzar walled it in again, and it remained so with its brazen gates until the time of the Macedonian conquest. And after other things, he says, Nabuchodonosor, having succeeded to the kingdom, built the walls of Babylon in a triple circuit in 15 days, and he turned the river Armacali, a branch of the Euphrates, and a Arcanus above the city of Sippara. He dug a receptacle for the waters, whose perimeter was 40 parasangs, and whose depth was 20 cubits. And he placed gates at the entrance thereof, by opening which they irrigated the plants, and those they called echetognomons, or sluices. And he constructed dikes against the eruptions of the Erythraean Sea, and built the eruptions. That's interesting. Against the eruptions of the Erythraean Sea, and built the city of Pterodon against the incursions of the Arabs. And he adorned the palace with trees, and called them hanging gardens. Okay, the fragments of the Egyptian histories. Okay, so I'm not going to. If you guys want to check out the King's List, feel free to. I'm not going to read through the whole King's List. It's going to be extremely boring to listen to that. As you see here, it's like 17 Mephissites, foreign descent, 103 years, 18 Mephissites. I mean, this is just, it's ridiculous. So I'm not going to bother reading it. I'll maybe read the very little beginning of it. But if you guys want to check it out and look through it, the link to this book is in the description. So check that out, okay? And who knows, some of you who are really into chronology might find it extremely interesting. So, but either way, we'll start up. We'll do the Hermetic Creed, and the remains of Manetho, and the Laterculus or Eratosthenes, as long as it's not a whole nother king list again. So, the Hermetic Creed. This is an interesting one, guys. Listen to this. Before all things that really exist, and before the beginning of all time, there is one God. Now remember, this is the Egyptian religion right here. The Hermeticism is Egyptian. This is their religion. Everyone says that they are polytheistic, but I would argue that a lot of these quote-unquote polytheistic religions were polytheistic in terms of the quote masses, but not actually in the understanding of these priests. And over again, you see that there's always one high God. You know what I mean? And like Ra, for example, is sort of within that. But here is the Hermetic Creed. This is Egyptian here. So again, before all things that really exist and before the beginning of all time, there was one God. Prior to the first God and ruler of the world, remaining immovable in the solitude of his unity, for neither is intelligence mixed with him, nor any other thing. He is the exemplar of himself, the Father, the self-begotten God, who is the only Father, and is truly good. For he is the greatest and the first, the fountain of all things, and the root of all primary intellectual forms. But out of this one, the God that is self-sufficient shone forth of himself, for which reason he is the Father of himself and all-sufficient, for he is the beginning and the God of gods. He is unity from the only one, before essence, and yet he is the beginning of essence. For from him is entity and essence, on which account he is celebrated as the Prince of Intelligence. There are the most ancient principles of all things, which Hermes placed first in order before the ethereal, empyrean, and celestial deities. I find that very interesting, and we're going to be getting into, and I might read this again when I start to get into some of my the new series talking about the real roots of the Abrahamic faiths, and this is a big clue right here. And the thing is that the god El, right? El Elyon is exactly this. This is the exact explanation of what El Elyon essentially is. And there you go. That's a description from ancient Egypt. And we're going to, again, pass by all of these. I'm not sure here. Okay, so this is another king list. Okay, so one thing I will mention, though, I'll just read this one part here. Among the Egyptians, there is a certain tablet called the Old Chronicles, containing 30 dynasties and 113 descendants during the long period of 36,525 years. The first series of princes was that of the Orite. The second was that of the Mestrans, yeah. The third of Egyptians. The chronicle runs as follows. To Hephaestus is assigned no time, as he is apparent both by night and day. Helios, the son of Hephaestus, reigned 3 myriad of years. Then Cronus and the other 12 divinities reigned 33,984 years. And then there's all these demigods and all these other things. So here we go. Right. So these are the kings. This is a king list before the deluge, right? And this is the king list after the deluge. To the great and august king of Ptolemy, Philadelphus, Manetho, the high priest and scribe of the sacred Adia in Egypt, being by birth of a Sabenite and a citizen of Heliopolis, to his sovereign Ptolemy, humbly greeting. It is right for us, most mighty king, to pay due attention to all things which it is your pleasure we should take into consideration. In answer then to your inquiries concerning the things which shall come to pass in the world, I shall, according to your commands, lay before you what I have gathered from the sacred books written by Hermes Trismegistus, our forefather. Farewell, my prince and sovereign. Okay. Dynasty of the Demigods. Okay, so it's just kind of interesting, right? So look, Helios is actually the sun, right? Helio is a word meaning sun and not actually a globe. Um, at least that's what I have come up with. I think it actually probably means both, to tell you the truth, or used in both ways. But I know for a fact that it also is used as the sun. So it's interesting that I don't know. It's very interesting. This is a dynasty of the demigods, which is weird. But isn't it interesting though when you guys look at this? When we talk about when you have a lot of people who talk about how all these different polytheistic religions all seem to have the same characters with different names. This is it. Look at this, right? The first of the Egyptian kings was Hephaestus, who reigned, 724 years and a half in 4 days. I'm sorry, it's amazing. It's amazing details. The second was Helios, the son of Hephaestus. Again, the son of Hephaestus, right? And then Agathodamon, who reigned 56 and a half and 10 days. And you notice nobody's mentioned as a son or anything like that afterwards, right? So, again, just a little clue there. Fourth is Cronus, right? 40 and a half years. Fifth is Osiris and Isis, 35 years. Sixth is blank. Seventh is Typhon, 20. That's interesting, huh? Wow. I wonder why they left that one blank. Horus, the demigod, 25 years. Ares, the demigod, 23 years. Anubis, the demigod, 17 years. Heracles, or otherwise also spelled Hercules, or known as Hercules in some circles. I mean, they might be different, they might not, I don't know. Apollo, demigod, 25 years. Ammon, Tithos, Sosus, and Zeus. You see, it's very interesting. I don't know, I find that fascinating. Like, you have this, this old fragment of these Egyptian deities, dynasty of deities, and yet a lot of these are from different areas of the world. So, find that very fascinating. So let's see here. The Egyptian dynasties after the deluge. The first dynasty after the dead demigods. The first dynasty consisted of 8 kings, of whom the first was Menes, the Thenite. He reigned 62 years and perished by a wound received from a hippopotamus. Athothus, interesting. Athothus, his son, reigned 57 years. He built the palaces of Memphis, and left the anatomical books, anatomical books, for he was a physician. Let's see here. Okay, it's not much. Sasinius, his son, reigned 31 years. Venefices, his son, reigned 23 years. And this time a great plague raged through Europe. He raised the pyramids near Kochum. Eusephidus, his son, reigned 20 years. Okay, so it says here, I don't know where the, oh, I see it. Okay, so here's an asterisk here in the Greek. And it says the names and paragraphs contained between the parentheses are variations which occur in Eusebius. Huh. That's not interesting. And they just give us one. They just give us this. They just give us this part. That's it. That's weird. Okay. Meobitis, his son, 26 years. Semempis, his son, reigned 18 years. In his reign, a terrible pestilence afflicted Egypt. Bienchus, his son, reigned 26 years. The whole number of years accounted to 253. The second dynasty of the 9 Thanite kings. Yeah, okay. Again, I'm not going to read through all these. Third dynasty, you guys can go through that if you want to. We're going to get to more of the juicy stuff. But yeah, I mean, look how many supposedly detailed. This guy reigned 146 years. Whoa. Of 27, okay, I see. A 27 Memphis. Okay, I see it. Yeah, sorry. Of 19, yeah, okay. Interesting. I'm gonna keep going. Here we go. Oh, God. You see what I'm saying here? Like, this guy, Manetho, like, the king list, Egyptian king list is crazy. Somebody could actually, I think, look at that. Xerxes the Great, 21 years. Interesting. Of the 8 Persian kings, now you see that's kind of interesting. They list the king list, but at this time period, obviously, they're vassals of Persia, but yet they list them as part of the king's list. I find that fascinating and very interesting, and I think somebody who is really good at doing this kind of chronological research, I wonder what people can make of this stuff because it does seem like it's pretty detailed. I mean, this guy's 2 months, and we saw what was it, like a couple months, a day, and whatever else, a day and a half earlier. But yeah, there's a lot to look into. This is a pretty interesting, as far as it goes, like it's a pretty cool and interesting kind of thing to study if any of you guys are interested in checking that out. So we're gonna get to here. Now this is fascinating. Listen to this, okay? Again, all these titles are made by the author because, from what I can tell, there is no Greek that actually calls them that, whatever. They just kind of title it accordingly. But of course, that's what they are called. I think that's what they are called in the text itself, so whatever. But listen to this, guys. This is very, very interesting and makes you wonder where the real truth in history is, okay? So, we had formerly a king whose name was Timaeus. And in his time it came to pass, I know not how, that God was displeased with us, and there came from the east in a strange manner of men of ignoble race, who have the confidence to invade our country, and easily subdue it by their power without a battle. And when they had our rulers in their hands, they burnt our cities, and demolished the temples of the gods, and inflicted every kind of barbarity upon the inhabitants, slaying some and reducing the wives and children of others to a state of slavery. At length they made one of themselves king, whose name was Salatus. He lived at Memphis, rendered both the upper and lower regions of Egypt tributary, and stationed garrisons in palaces or in places where best adapted for that purpose. But he directed his attention principally to the security of the eastern frontier, for he regarded with suspicion the increasing power of the Assyrians, who he foresaw would one day undertake an invasion of the kingdom, and observing in the Saite Nome upon the east of Bubastite channel, a city with which from some ancient theological reference was called Avaris. Avaris. Remember that and think about what that word means today. And finding it admirably adapted to his, or avarice, that's what I mean, avarice. Finding it admirably adapted to his purpose, he rebuilt it and strongly fortified it with walls and garrisoned it with a force of 250,000 armed men. To this city Salatis repaired in summertime to collect his tribute and pay his troops and to exercise his soldiers in order to strike terror into foreigners. And Salatis died after a reign of 19 years. After him reigned Beon 44 years, and he was succeeded by Apacnus, who reigned 36 years and 7 months. After him reigned Apophis 61 years, and Oannes or Giannis 50 years and 1 month. So something I've learned reading a lot of old texts is that I's are often synonymous with J's as well. And we see that in dates as well. But just so you guys know, sometimes I'll read things in Oannes or Giannis, and that's why. After all these reigned Assis for 49 years and 2 months. These 6 were the first rulers amongst them, and during all the period of their dynasty, they made war upon the Egyptians in hope of exterminating the whole race. All this nation was styled Hyksos, that is, the shepherd kings. For the first syllable, Hik, according to the sacred dialect, denotes a king, and sos signifies a shepherd, but this according to the vulgar tongue, and of these is compounded the term Hyksos. Some say they were Arabians, this people who were thus denominated shepherd kings, and their descendants retained possession of Egypt for the space of 511 years. Now, I hope you guys are paying attention to this, because this is literally the exact opposite story in the Bible. All right? It's the exact opposite. Keep in mind that one of the things that people do to screw up history is they flip things around. And it's a very easy and magical thing that is done constantly, even today. If you just, all you got to do is turn on the television or the news, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. the constant flipping of the truth, the obscuring of all things. But isn't that interesting, though, huh? So continuing, because it gets better. After these things, he relates that the kings of Thebes and of the other parts of Egypt made an insurrection against the shepherds, and at that a long and mighty war was carried on between them until the shepherds were subdued by a king whose name was Alice Fragmothos, Alice Fragmothosis, and were by him driven out of the rest of Egypt and hemmed within a place containing 10,000 acres, which was called Avaris, or Avaris. All this tract, says Manetho, the shepherds surrounded with a vast and strong wall, that they might retain all their possessions and their prey within a hold of strength. And I just want to point this out, this word right here. Take a look at that. Thamosis. It's also spelled Thutmosis, and Thut is of Thoth. So Moses of Thoth. I have a whole other book that I'm going to be reading called Moses the Egyptian, and I think that's going to be a very fascinating read in the future, but pay attention to that. And Thamosis, the son of Alice Fragmothosis, endeavored to force them by a siege and beleaguered the place with a body of 480,000 men. But at the moment when he despaired of reducing them by siege, they agreed to a capitulation, and they would leave Egypt and should be permitted to go without molestation wheresoever they pleased. And according to this stipulation, they departed from Egypt with all their families and effects in numbers not less than 240,000, and bent their way through the desert towards Syria. But as they stood in fear of the Assyrians, who had then dominion over Asia, they built a city in that country which is now called Judea, of sufficient size to contain this multitude of men, and named it Jerusalem. Interesting, huh? And another book of the Egyptian histories, Manetho says that this people who are here called shepherds in their sacred books were also styled captives. Okay, that's not an interesting comment. So Manetho says that this people who are here called shepherds in their sacred books are also styled captives. After the departure of this nation of shepherds to Jerusalem, Thutmosis, again, like I said, Thutmosis, the king of Egypt, who drove them out, reigned 25 years and 4 months, and then died. After him, his son Chebron took the government into his hands for 13 years. After him reigned Amenophis for 20 years and 7 months, and his sister Amenesis, you see that? Look at that. His sister Amesis, 21 years and 9 months. Yet, when you see women who are part of ruling classes, you know it's not a completely patriarchal system. Just to point that out. She was succeeded by Mefres, who reigned 12 years and 9 months. After him, Mephramothosis, again, 25 years and 10 months. Then Thamosis reigned 9 years and 8 months. After whom, Memophosis, 30 years. Yep. And after, okay, I'm just going to come down here. Okay, anyway, so after him, Menophosis, 19 years, 6 months, and he was succeeded by Thesosis, who is called Ramses. He maintained an army of cavalry and a naval force. This king, Thesosis, appointed his brother Armaeus his viceroy over Egypt. He also invested him with all the other authority of a king, but with these restrictions, that he should not wear the diadem or interfere with the queen, the mother of his children, or abuse the royal concubines. Sethosis then made an expedition against Cyprus and Phoenicia and waged war with the Assyrians and Medes, and he subdued them all, some by force of arms and other without a blow, but by the mere terror of his power. And being puffed up with his success, he advanced still more confidently and overthrew the cities and has subdued the countries of the east. When we're going to be reading the story of Phoenicia, which is probably the quintessential book written about all the collected historical knowledge we have of Phoenicia, and this thing we just read we'll definitely come back to, because this is definitely a major issue that happened at this period of time. and the ones that they didn't subdue them all, but others without a blow. Phoenicia definitely. I'm pretty sure in this instance they switched sides because of some horrible things that happened to them that the Persians did after they took over. Anyways, continuing. But Armaeus, who was left in Egypt, took advantage of the opportunity and fearlessly committed all those acts which his brother had enjoined him not to do. Oh, big surprise. He violated the queen and continued an unrestrained intercourse with the rest. And at the persuasion of his friends, he assumed the diadem and openly opposed his brother. But the ruler over the priests of Egypt sent to Sethosis and informed him of what had happened and how his brother had set himself up in opposition to his power. Upon this, Sethosis immediately returned to Pelusium and recovered his kingdom. The country of Egypt took its name from Thesosis, who was also called Egyptus, as was his brother Armaeus, known by the name of Danaus. Okay, and here we go. Of the shepherd kings, or of the Israelites. The king Amenophis was desirous of beholding the gods as Horus, one of his predecessors in the kingdom, had seen them, and he communicated his desire to a priest at the same name with himself, Amenophis, the son of Pappus, who seemed to partake of the divine nature, both in wisdom and knowledge of futurity. And Amenophis returned him answer, in that he might behold the gods if he would cleanse the country of all the lepers and other unclean persons that were in it. Well pleased with this information, the king gathered together out of the land of Egypt all that labored under any defect in body to the amount of 80,000, and sent them to the quarries which are situate on the east side of the Nile, that they might work in them and be separated from the rest of the Egyptians. And he says, there were among them some learned priests who were affected with leprosy. And Amenophis, the wise man and prophet, fearful lest the vengeance of the gods should fall both on himself and on the king, if it should appear that violence had been offered them, added this also in a prophetic spirit, that certain people would come into the assistance of these polluted wretches, and would subdue Egypt and hold it in possession for 13 years. These tidings, however, he dared not communicate to the king, but he left in writing an account of what should come to pass, and destroyed himself, at which the king was fearfully distressed. Interesting. So I think what this is, if I'm not mistaken, this is like another version of what we just read up here, okay? The shepherd king thing. After which he writes thus, word for word. When those that were sent to work in the quarries had continued for some time in that miserable state, the king was petitioned to set apart for their habitation the protection of the city Avaris. But again, what does avarice mean today? Which had been left desolate by the shepherds, and he granted them their desire. Now the city, according to the theology above, is a Typhonian city. When these men had taken possession of the city and found it well adapted for a revolt, they appointed over themselves a ruler out of the priests of Heliopolis, one whose name was I'm going to have to say this name a lot. So Osarsiph. There we go. They bound themselves by oath that they would be obedient. Osarsiph then, in the first place, enacted this law, and that they should neither worship the gods nor abstain from any of those sacred animals which the Egyptians hold in the highest veneration, but sacrifice and slay them all, and that they should connect themselves with none but such as were of that confederacy. That's an interesting statement. When he had made such laws as these and many others of a tendency directly in opposition to the customs of the Egyptians, he gave orders that they should employ the multitude of hands in rebuilding the walls about the city, and hold themselves in readiness for war with Amenophis the king, while he took into his confidence the councils, some others of the priests and unclean persons, and he sent ambassadors to the city called Jerusalem, to those shepherds who had been expelled by Thutmosis. Again, Thutmosis, whereby he informed them of the affairs of himself and of others who had been treated in the same ignominious manner, and requested that they come with one consent to his assistance in this war against Egypt. He also promised in the first place to reinstate them in their ancient city and country Avaris, and provide a plentiful maintenance for their host, and fight for them as occasion might require, and inform them that they could easily reduce the country under dominion. The shepherds received this message with the greatest joy and quickly mustered to the number of 200,000 men and came up to Avaris. And now Amenophis, the king of Egypt, when he was informed of their invasion, was in great consternation, remembering the prophecy of Amenophis, the son of Pappus, and he assembled the armies of the Egyptians and took counsel with the leaders and commanded the sacred animals to be brought to him, especially those which were held in the greatest veneration in the temples, and particularly charged the priests to conceal the images of their gods with the utmost care. And his son Sethos, who was also called Ramses from his father Ramses, being but 5 years old, he committed to the protection of a friend, and he marched with the rest of the Egyptians, being 300,000 warriors, against the enemy who advanced to meet him. But he did not attack them, thinking it would be to wage war against the gods. But he returned and came again to Memphis, where he took Apis and the other sacred animals he had sent for, and retreated immediately to Ethiopia, together with all his army and all the multitude of the Egyptians. For the king of Ethiopia was under obligation to him, wherefore he received him kindly and took care of all the multitude that was with him, while the country supplied all that was necessary for their food. He also allotted to him cities and villages during his exile, which was to continue from its beginning during the predestined 13 years. Moreover, he pitched a camp for Ethiopian army upon the borders of Egypt as a protection to King Amenophis. While such was the state of things in Ethiopia, the people of Jerusalem, having come down with the unclean of the Egyptians, treated the inhabitants with such barbarity that those who witnessed their impieties believed that their joint sway was more execrable than that which the shepherds had formerly exercised. So it was worse. Okay, so apparently, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. Anyway, so that which they had formerly exercised. For they not only set fire to the cities and villages, but committed every kind of sacrilege and destroyed the images of the gods and roasted and fed upon those sacred animals that were worshipped. And having compelled the priests and the prophets to kill and sacrifice them, they cast them naked out of the country. It is said also that the priests who ordained their polity and laws was by birth of Heliopolis, and his name was Osarseph, from Osiris, the god of Heliopolis. But that when he went over to these people, his name was changed, and he was called Moises. Again. That's some very crazy stuff right there, guys. And again, Osiris is in Egyptian the sun god, is it not, if I'm not mistaken? I think so. So Heliopolis, sun god, Osiris. But how very interesting, huh? Yeah. Very, very interesting indeed. His name was Osarseph, from Osiris, so his name was from Osiris, the god of Heliopolis. But that when he went over to the people, his name was changed and he was called Moises. How absolutely very interesting. And then we have Thutmoses, like what in the world is going on here, you guys? And the real question is that which of, and that's actually a big, that's a academic debate that is going on and is still going on, in the question of whether these ancient fragments precede any of the original or any of the Bible writings. And there's a lot of people who say yes, and there's a bunch of people who say no. But I think one of the things that people have to pay attention to, especially when we read a lot of these things and the Bible itself, is that one of the big problems with history is that the historians have tried to fit history into the Bible, quote unquote, chronology, so to speak. And that's been a disaster for archaeology, for a lot of different stuff. And a lot of stuff just doesn't make any sense, which is why, you got so many people on YouTube and all over the place, and who are doing good work, who are unearthing a lot of these things and saying, you know what, there's something wrong here. And so I think a lot of these texts that we're reading in this book are an important clue to some of these things, especially with, you saw we have different flood stories, we have different exoduses. Now there's I'm probably going to have to do like an addendum section to this, because there's another book that came out that's the same title, but it has extra stuff in it. So if I'm not mistaken, it actually has like 5 or 6 different Exodus stories from 5 or 6 different civilizations, and we'll read those because those are really interesting. And we can, and then you guys can see how many different types of stories there are. Make up your own mind. Continuing. Manetho says again that after this, Amenophis returned from Ethiopia with a great force, and Ramses, also his son, with other forces, and encountered the shepherds and the unclean people. They defeated them and slew multitudes of them and pursued them to the bounds of Syria. Here we go. Okay, if I'm not mistaken, this is another list of kings, which I'm not going to go through here, but this is Eratosthenes, Canon of the King of Thebes. So if you guys want to check that out, go ahead. Interesting, 20 in the year of the world 2900. So I wonder how somebody could figure out what they exactly mean by that. Since obviously all these dates are completely thrown into obscurity with the fact that even our own current chronology is all screwed up. So who knows how old any of these things are. All right, so I'm going to skip all this. Okay, so we have the fragments of the Tyrian annals from Deus and Menander. Okay, so we'll get into this. The Tyrian annals from Deus of Hiram. And I'm thinking maybe Hiram Abiff? I'm not so sure. But Hiram is certainly a character who is prominently in the Bible itself. And if you really look at the Bible, the Canaanites and / Phoenicians are all over the Bible. I mean, constantly, you know what I mean? They're enemies or not enemies. They're building temples for each other. They're great friends. It's very interesting, the intermingled storylines within the Bible itself, which I find fascinating since there's almost no, we're looking at fragments here, and remember that there are almost, how in the world do we have all this Roman stuff? We have all this other stuff. We have all this Greek. You guys realize that the Phoenicians themselves, they're, up through the end of Carthage, or at least officially, they claim that they were a people and a distinctive people up through the 2nd century AD. So how come we have nothing from them, or very little, and there's so much destruction, but yet you have them intermixed in all these stories here. I find that to be fascinating. So anyways, continuing, the Tyrian annals from Deus. Upon the death of Abibalus, his son Hieronymus, Hiram, succeeded to the kingdom. He raised the eastern parts of the city and enlarged it and joined it to the temple of Jupiter Olympius, which stood before upon an island filled by the intermediate space. And he adorned that temple with donations of gold. And he went up to Libanus to cut timber for the construction of the temples. And it is said that Solomon, king of Jerusalem, here we go, sent enigmas to Hieronymus and desired others in return with a proposal that whichsoever of the two was unable to solve them should forfeit money to the other. Hieronymus agreed to the proposal, but was unable to solve the enigmas, so riddles, and paid a large sum as a forfeit. And it is said that one Abdonimus, a Tyrian, solved the enigmas and proposed others which Solomon was not able to unriddle, for which he repaid the fine to Hieronymus. And there you go. That's a very tiny fragment there. And again, this is by Josephus, if I'm not mistaken. So take that as you will. I think Josephus certainly wrote plenty of things that were probably right, but I think he probably is also one of these people who have come in to manipulate at the same time. Okay, from Menander, the story of Hiram. Looks like, again, it's from Josephus. So through Josephus, we get from Menander. After the death of Abibalus, Hieronymus, his son, succeeded him in the kingdom, reigned 34 years, having lived 53. He laid out that part of the city which is called Urikoron, and consecrated the golden column, which is the temple of Jupiter. And he went up into the forest on the mountain called Libanus to fell, Libanus as in Lebanon, right? Phoenicia, to fell cedars for the roofs of the temple. And having demolished the ancient temples, he rebuilt them and consecrated the fanes of Hercules and Astarte. So Hercules is also, if I'm not mistaken, known as Marduk, or maybe it's not Marduk, maybe it's the other one. can't think of his name right now, but anyway, so Hercules and Astarte. He constructed that of Hercules first in the month Peritius, then that of the Astarte when he had overcome the Titians who had refused to pay their tribute. And when he had reduced them, he returned. In this time he was a certain young man named Abdemonus, who used to solve the problems which were propounded to him by Solomon, king of Jerusalem, of the successors of Hiram. Upon the death of Hiram, Beleazarus, his son, succeeded to the kingdom. He lived 43 years and reigned 7. After him, Abdastratus, his son, reigned 9 years, having lived 29. Against him, the 4 sons of his nurse conspired and slew him, and of these the eldest reigned 12 years. After them, Astartus, the son of Delestartus, reigned 12 years, having lived 44. After him, the brothers of Assuramus reigned 9 years, having lived 44. Okay, and he was slain by his brother Phyllis, who governed the kingdom 8 months, having lived 50 years. He was slain by a priest of Astarte. Ithobalus, who reigned 32 years, having lived 68, and he was succeeded by Bedezarus, his son, who reigned 6 years, having lived 45. His successor was Matgenius, his son, who reigned some 9 years, having lived 32, and he was succeeded by Pygmalion, who reigned 47 years, having lived 56. In the 7th year of his reign, his sister fled from him and founded the city of Carthage in Libya. Okay, that's great, because we'll get into that, because that's definitely into Rollison's book, The Story of Phoenicia. So it's actually kind of cool. We have some kind of, and maybe we'll go back to this when we go through that history book, because that book is very interesting, and I think it shows you a lot of clues about ancient history. But this is definitely coinciding with other stuff. So, of the invasion of the Salmanassar, Eluleus reigned 36 years, and he fitted out a fleet against the Citaeans, Chittim or Cypriots, who had revolted, and reduced them to obedience. But Salmanassar, the king of the Assyrians, sent them assistance and overran Phoenicia. And when he made peace with the Phoenicians, he returned with all his forces, and Sidon and Acre, and Palatyrus, which is Palestine, and many other cities revolted from the Tyrians and put themselves under the protection of the king of Assyria. But the Tyrians still refused to submit, and the king made another expedition against them, and the Phoenicians furnished him with 60 ships and 80 galleys, and the Tyrians attacked him with 12 ships and dispersed the hostile fleet. And we'll get into that in the history of Phoenicia, because there's a whole account to that. And took prisoners to the amount of 500 men, upon which the Tyrians were held in great respect. But the king of Assyria stationed guards upon the river and aqueducts to prevent the Tyrians from drawing water, and this continued 5 years, during all which time they were obliged to drink from the wells that they dug. Another very small account of the kings and judges from Nebuchadnezzar to Cyrus, the reigns of Ithobalus, Nebuchadnezzar, besieged Tyre for 13 years, and after him reigned Baal 10 years. After him judges were appointed who judged the people. Sounds like the chapter Judges, doesn't it? Ecnebalus of Basilicus 2 months. Chelbus, the son of Abdias, 10 months. Okay, yep. After they been. After them, Belaterus reigned 1 year. After his death, they sent to fetch Marbalus from Babylon, and he reigned 4 years. And when he died, they sent for Hieromus, his brother, who reigned 20 years. In his time of Cyrus was king of Persia. I think that is a good clue as well. And this time, because this time period. In the city, or in all of the Levant, Cyrus was a huge power player. And this is when their empire was just huge. The Oracles of Zoroaster. Oh, okay. This is going to be a lot of kind of poetry kind of stuff here. So, how interesting. How interesting indeed. So if you guys were listening if you guys listen to the Rosicrucian book, one of the things they talk about is a monad. As you see here, right off the top, we see a monad, a duad, and a triad. How fascinating. It looks like I'm going to have to do this as a 2-page. Maybe not. All right, so let's get into this. I'm going to do my best to get through this, guys. But Oracles of Zoroaster, this is kind of spiritual poetry, so to speak. So let's get into this and see how many kinds of different similarities that we can see throughout all the other religions that we're all very familiar with. So, where the paternal monad is, the monad is enlarged and generates two, and from the duad sits by him, and glitters with intellectual sections, both to governs all things, and to order everything not ordered. For in the whole world shineth the triad, over which the monad rules. There you go, interesting already. This order is the beginning of all section. So, i.e., this is the beginning of all separation from the one. For the mind of the Father said that all things be cut into three, whose will assented, and then all things were divided. You see what I mean? For the mind of the eternal Father set all things into three, governing all things by the mind, and there appeared in it the triad, virtue and wisdom, and multiscient verity. And multiscient verity. Interesting. This way floweth the shape of the triad, being pre-existent, not the first essence, but where they are measured. For thou must conceive that all things serve these three principles. The one is the sacred course, but in the middle, air. The third, the other which cherisheth the earth, is fire. In the fountain of fountains and of all fountains, the matrix containing all things, thence abundantly springs forth the generations of multifarious matter. Wow. I hope you guys are paying attention to this, because there's some interesting things here. I love this part, though. Where is it at? Yeah. Okay. So in the middle, as in the physical world, the air, the third order, which cherishes the earth, in fire, right? So fire and air. And also in Phoenicia, and also not just Phoenicia, but that whole area, right? You have a common thing where you have two pillars at the entrances of many ancient temples, right? Or two pillars inside the temples themselves. And those temples are fire and wind or air, right? So keep that in mind. That exists like that in all over the Levantine area. And it's all part of the kind of huge, I don't know how to explain it exactly, but as I'm doing way more research and studying all these things, I'm finding that it seems that there was a really large religion practiced by practically everybody, and that yes, there are slight differences and stuff, but there are so many that it seems like it's very cohesive to a point, and then everything just kind of goes all over the place. But you'll find that two pillars, fire and air or wind, and in many, many, many temples across the ancient world. So continuing, thence attracted the prester of the flower of glowing fire, flashing into the cavities of the world, for all things from thence begin to extend downwards their admirable beams. Whoa. Flower of life, fire again, Rosicrucian symbolism. Yeah. The Father and mind. The Father hath snatched away himself, neither hath he shut up his own fire in his intellectual power. For nothing unfinished proceedeth from the Father's rule. For the Father perfected all things, and delivered them over to the second mind, the divisionary one, which the whole race of men call the first, i.e. also would be considered a demiurge in various different religious understandings. Light begotten of the Father, for he alone, having cropped the flower of the mind from the Father's vigor, for the paternal self-begotten mind, understanding his work, sowed in all the fiery bond of love. that all things might continue loving forever. Neither those things which are intellectually context in the light of the fathers in all things, that being the elements of the world, they might persist in love. For by understanding he hath the power to instill the paternal mind into all fountains and beginnings. For it is the bound of the paternal depths and the fountain of the intellectuals. Neither went he forth, but abode in the paternal depth, and in the aditum, aditum, according to the divinely nourished silence. For the fire once above shutteth not his power into matter by actions, but by the mind. For the paternal mind hath sowed symbols through the world, which understandeth intelligibles and beautifieth ineffables, holy division and indivisible. By means he contains the intelligibles, but introduceth sense into the worlds. By mind he contains the intelligibles, but introduceth soul into the worlds. Again, there's the Greek. Mind, intelligibles, and intellectuals. And of the one mind, the intelligible mind, in big, in capital letter mind. Excuse me. For the mind is not without the intelligible. It exists not without it. These are intellectuals and intelligibles which, being understood, understand. For the intelligible is the aliment of the intelligent. Learn the intelligible, since it exists beyond the mind, and of the mind which moves the empyreal heaven. For the framer of the fiery world is the mind of the mind, who you know certainly the supermundane paternal depth. The intelligible is predominant over all section. There is something intelligible which it behoves thee to understand with the flower of the mind. For if thou inclinest thy mind, thou shalt understand this also. Yet understanding something of it, thou shalt not understand this wholly. For it is a power of circumlucid strength. What an interesting word. Glittering with intellectual sections, rays, but it behoves not to consider this intelligible with vehemence of intellection. To consider this intelligible with vehemence of intellection, but with the ample flame of the ample mind, which measureth all things except this intelligible. But it behoves to understand this, for if thou inclinest thy mind, thou shalt understand this also, not fixedly, but having a pure turning eye, thou must extend the empty mind of thy soul towards the intelligible, that thou may learn the intelligible, for it exists beyond the mind. But every mind understands this God, for the mind is not without the intelligible, neither is the intelligible without the mind. To the intellectual presters of the intellectual fire, all things by yielding are subservient to the persuasive counsel of the Father. And to understand and always to remain in a restless whirling, fountains and principles, to turn and always to remain in restless whirling, by insinuating into worlds the venerable name in a sleepless whirling. Oh my God. And a sleepless whirling sounds like, who is it, Brahma, I think? The dreamer? And the maker who, self-operating, framed the world. That's just like Brahma. Who sprung first out of the mind, clothing fire with fire. Again, fire doesn't mean fire, you guys. Remember, if you've read the philosophy of fire, you realize it means soul, spirit. Binding them together to mingle the fountainous craters, preserving the flower of his own fire. He glittereth with intellectual sections, and filleth all things with love. That things unfashioned may be fashioned, like swarms they are carried, being broken without the bodies of the world. What the mind speaks, it speaks by understanding. Power is with them. Mind is from her. Inges, ideas and principles. I don't know what that is. Janges? I don't know. These being many ascended into the lucid worlds, springing into them, and into which are three tops. Beneath them lies the chief of immaterials. Principles which have understood the intelligible works of the Father. Oh, and by the way, if you haven't caught on to this, At least this particular thing, and also the Hermetic stuff. Just if you're into alchemy and things like that, like, this is where they get a lot of their ideas from. Is a lot of these texts. I just wanted to point that out. Disclose, okay, so principles, yes, principles which have understood the intelligible works of the Father, disclose them in sensible works as in bodies, being, as it were, the ferryman betwixt the Father and matter. So in this particular thing here, where it talks about the ferryman, you could replace the ferryman with the Holy Spirit, right? Because that's essentially what the Holy Spirit essentially is, that connection between God and us, God and Jesus, or whatever. It's part of that Trinitarian thing. So I just wanted to point that out. This is yet another example of these kind of same types of ideas that are present in these very old fragments. Continuing. Okay, so being, as it were, the ferryman betwixt the Father and matter, and producing manifest images of unmanifest things, and inscribing the unmanifest in the manifest frame of the world. The mind of the Father making a jarring noise, understanding by vigorous counsel, omniform ideas, and flying out of one fountain. They sprung forth from the Father was the counsel and end, by which they are connected with the Father by alternate life from several vehicles. I hope you're paying attention. They're now talking about reincarnation, you see. Now, another thing I want to point out is that where do you find hell? The idea of hell in any of these older things, right? There's an underworld, but the underworld is essentially the place in between lives, right? So the alternate life from several vehicles, and that's really what you have. And what does that create? Like, if there's no burning, horrible hell to go to, then how do you think people are necessarily going to be afraid to die? Or afraid to stand up for something or whatever else, if they understood that maybe, say, reincarnation might be real? It's, people I think should keep in mind that religious ideas create the whole society behind them. And yeah, when they say things like, oh, America is a Christian nation and all that, yes and no at the same time, because it's definitely also based on some very other things. But yeah, very much Christian in a lot of ways. And now you see the whole idea of guilt and all these things which are plagued by these religions, unfortunately, and it creates this terrible situation of despair. Because, like, we're told that we're all going to go to hell if we don't live a good life, and we have one life to do it, and it doesn't matter if you're born in the most insane circumstances, and it doesn't matter how many things happen to you, which are, that put you in certain situations. Like, none of that stuff matters. You're just going to go to hell. And if you don't believe in those religions, well, then you're going to go to hell or purgatory or some kind of insane thing. I don't know. I don't know what you guys think, but I think it's very interesting, right? And I think one of these things that you see over and over and over and over and over again is this idea that reincarnation does exist, and that you are a part of a oneness, and they're all different kinds of religions, but here they are all having the same ideas. So take from it what you guys will. I have my opinions, and you guys will have yours. So, but I think this is cool, and I could see why Zoroastrian stuff would have been popular. So, anyways, I'll go back a little bit, and I'll get through this without making any more comments. But they were divided, being an intellectual fire distributed into other intellectuals. For the king did set before the multiform world an intellectual incorruptible pattern, the print of whose form he promoted through the world, according to which things the world appeared. Beautiful with all kinds of ideas, of which there is one fountain, out of which come rushing forth others undisturbed, being broken about the bodies of the world, which through the vast recesses, like swarms, are carried round about every way. Intellectual notions from the paternal fountain, cropping the flower of fire, in the point of sleepless time of this primigenous idea. In the point of sleepless time of this primigenous idea, the first self-budding fountain of the Father budded. Intelligence, linges, I don't know, do themselves also understand from the Father, by unspeakable counsel being moved so as to understand. Unspeakable counsels, so that's mind connection, their psychic connection with God. Hecate, Sinochis, and Teletarchs. I don't know what that means. For out of him spring all implacable thunders, and the prester receiving cavities of the internally lucid strength of father begotten Hecate. Maybe, is that the name of the Mexican beer? I think it is. Or no, that's Tecate, sorry. and Hecate, and he who begirds vis-a-vis the flower of fire and the strong spirit of the poles fiery above. He gave to his presters that they should guard the tops, mingling the power of his own strength in the Sinoches, I don't know, of oh how the world hath intelligible guides inflexible, because she is the operatrix, because she is the dispensatrix of the fire-giving life. Also it fills the life-producing bosom of Hecate, or Hesete, I don't know, and instills in the Sinochis, the enlivened strength of potent fire. So, spiritual strength. But they are guardians of the works of the Father, for he assimilates himself, professing to be clothed with the print of the images. The Teletarchs are comprehended with the Sinochis. To those intellectual presters of intellectual fire, all things are subservient. But as many are served the material Sinochis, having put on the completely armed vigor of resounding light, with triple strength of fortifying the soul and the mind, to put into the mind the symbol of variety, and not to walk dispersedly on the imperial channels, but firmly. These frame indivisibles and sensibles and corporiforms, and things destined to matter. Soul and nature, the soul being a bright fire by the power of the Father, remains immortal and is mistress of life. Oh man. And possesseth many complexions of the cavities of the world, for it is in an imitation of the mind, and that which is born hath something of the body. The channels being intermixed, she performs the part of incorruptible fire. Next, in other words, the channels being mixed, she performs the part of incorruptible fire. So, as in the soul is perfect soul, as what it actually is, not as what it might seem to be in the illusionary game we're all playing in this life. Or like they said earlier, the Matrix. Next, the pattern of conception, I, the soul dwell, warmth heating all things, for he did put the mind in the soul and the dull body, and of us the Father of gods, and men interposed, abundantly animating light, fire, ether, worlds. For natural works coexist with the intellectual light of the Father, for the soul which adorned the great heaven and adorned the Father. But her horns are fixed above. But about the shoulders of the goddess immense nature is exalted. And again, indefatigable nature commands the worlds and works, that heaven drawing an eternal course might run, and the swift sun might come about the center as he useth. Look not into the fatal name of this nature, the Maker who, portraying by himself, framed the world, and there was another bulk of fire. Okay, the world, all right. The Maker who portraying himself framed the world, and there was another bulk of fire, self-operating all things, that the body of the world might be perfected, that the world might be manifest and not membranous, the whole world of fire and water and earth and all nourishing ether. That's the cross yet again. 4 angels, all that kind of stuff. The inexpressible and expressible watchwords of the world, one life with another from the distributed channels, passing from above the opposite part through the center of the earth, and another fifth the middle, another fiery channel where it descends to the material channels, life-bringing fire, stirring himself up, the goad of resounding light, other fountainous which guides the imperial world, the center from which all lines which makes soever are equal, for the paternal mind sowed symbols through the world, for the center of every one is carried betwixt the fathers. For it is an imitation of the mind, but that which is born hath something of a body. Heaven, for the Father congregated 7 firmaments of the world. Okay, guys, there you go. 7 yet again. 7 from the ancient sevens that we see all over the place. Circumscribing heaven in a round figure, and fixed a great company of inerratic stars, and he constituted a septenary of erratic animals, placing earth in the middle and water in the middle of the earth. Sounds very Buddhist in their imagery there, doesn't it? The air above these, he fixed a great company of inerratic stars. To inerratic, as in they move according to specific motions, to be carried not by laborious and troublesome tension, but by a settlement which hath no error. He fixed a great company of inerratic stars, forcing fire, to be carried by a settlement which hath no error. He constituted them 6, casting into the midst of the 7th fire of the sun, suspending their disorder in well-ordered zones. For the goddess bring forth the great sun and the bright moon, O ether, sun, spirit of the moon, guides of the air, and of the solar circles, and of the lunar clashings, and of the aerial recesses. The lunar clashings, that sounds interesting. The melody of the ether, and the passage of the sun and moon, and of the air, and the wide air, and the lunar course of the pole of the sun. It collects it, receives the melody of the ether, and of the sun, and of the moon, and of all things that are contained in the air. Fire, the derivation of fire, the dispenser of fire. His hair pointed is seen by his native light. Hence Cronus, the sun, assessor beholding the pure pole, and the ethereal course, and the vast motion of the moon, and the aerial fluxions, and the great sun, the bright moon, Time, the mundane goal, eternal, infinite, young and old, and of spiral form, and another fountainess who guides the imperial heaven. Okay, and that was it for time. Interesting. Soul, body, man. It behoves thee to hasten to the light and the beams of the Father, from whence was sent to thee a soul clothed with much mind. These things the Father conceived, and so the mortal was animated, for the paternal mind sowed symbols and souls, replenishing souls with profound love. For the Father of gods, men placed the mind in the soul, and in the body he established you. For all divine things are corporeal, but bodies are bound in them for your sakes. Interesting. Incorporeal, not being able to contain the bodies, by reason of the corporeal nature in which you are concentrated. That's an interesting word. By reason of the corporeal nature in which you are concentrated. Okay, let me go back. Incorporeals, not being able to contain the bodies by reason of the corporeal nature in which you are concentrated. And they are in God, attracting strong flames, descending from the Father, from which descending the soul crops of imperial fruits, the soul nourishing flower. Therefore, conceiving the works of the Father, they avoid the audacious wing of fatal destiny. And though you see this soul manumitted, yet the Father sends another to make up the number. Certainly these are superlative, blessed above all souls. They are sent forth from heaven to earth, and those rich souls which have inexpressible fates of many of them, O King, as proceed from shining thee, or from Jove himself, under the strong power of his thread, let the immortal depth of thy soul be predominant but thine eyes. Did you guys just hear that? Or from Jove himself, under the strong power of his thread, let the immortal depth of thy soul be predominant but thine eyes. Interesting. And remember, Zoroastrianism is Persian, if I'm not mistaken. So here's yet another interconnecting, not just name, but idea, I guess, in some way, that is in and of itself something different than what we understand as Abrahamic faiths. And here we go. Yet again. How about that? So let the immortal depth of thy soul be predominant, but thine eyes extend upwards. Stoop not down to the dark world, beneath which continually lies a faithless depth, and Hades dark all over, squalid and delighting in images of the unintelligible, precipitous, craggy, always invoking a dark abyss, always espousing an opacious, idle, breathless body. And understand they're not actually talking about a physical plane here. Okay, this is a spiritual idea about where your mind might live. And the light hating world, and the winding currents by which many things are swallowed up, seek paradise. Seek thou the way of the soul, whence and by what order, having served the body, to the same place from which thou didst flow, thou mayest rise up again, joining action to sacred speech. Stoop not down, for a precipice lies below the earth, drawing through the ladder which hath 7 steps, beneath which is the throne of necessity. Enlarge not thy destiny. The soul of men will in a manner clasp God to herself. Having nothing mortal, she is wholly inebriated from God. For she boasts harmony in which the mortal body exists. If thou extend the fiery mind to the work of piety, thou shalt preserve the flexible body. And I will say, I'll just stop for a second and just say that look at people who are generally peaceful people, right, in your life. People who aren't overreactive, you never really hear them yell, you really don't hear them talk very much. And as they get older, they don't look that old because stress kills. And that's a big point here. And I think they're just repeating this very simple idea. And I think that's, I agree with this. I don't know about you guys, but I do. Let's see here. So, yes, thou shalt preserve the flexible body. There is a room for the image also in the circumlucid place. Every way to the unfashioned soul stretches the reins of fire. The fire-glowing cogitation hath the first rank, and the mortal approaching to the fire shall have light from God. For to the slow mortal the gods are swift. That's a funny line. The Furies are stranglers of men. The Borgians, even of ill matter, are profitable and good, but fiery hope nourish thee in the angelic region. But the paternal mind accepts not her will until she go out of oblivion and pronounce a word, inserting the remembrance of the pure paternal symbol. To these he gave the docile characters of life to be comprehended. Those that were asleep he made fruitful by his own strength. Defile not the spirit, or deepen a superficies. Okay. Obviously superficial stuff. Defile not the spirit, or deepen a superficies. Leave not the dross of matter on a precipice. Bring her not forth, lest going forth she has something. The souls of those who quit the body violently are most pure. The ungirders of the soul which give her breathing are easy to be loosed. Interesting. What a weird thing to say. People who die violently are the most pure. I guess. Not sure in the full context of it, but okay. In the side of sinister Hecate, there is a fountain of virtue which remains entire within, not omitting her virginity. O man, the machine of boldest nature, subject not to thy mind the vast measures of the earth, for the plant of truth is not upon earth, nor measure the measures of the sun. Gathering together cannons, he is moved by the eternal will of the Father, not for thy sake, let alone the swift course of the moon and the progression of the stars. For she runs always by the impulse of necessity, and the progression of the stars was not brought forth for thy sake. The ethereal wide flight of birds is not voracious, and the dissections of the entrails of victims, all of these are toys. The supports of gainful cheats, fly thou these. If thou intendest to open the sacred paradise of piety, where virtue, wisdom, and equity are assembled. For thy vessel the beasts of the earth shall inhabit, and the earth bewails them even to their children. Okay, demons and rites. Nature persuades that there are pure demons. The Bergians, even of ill matter, are profitable and good. But these things I revolve But these things I revolve in the recluse temples of my mind. You see what they're saying here? All demons are our demons. Extending like the fire sparkingly into the spacious air, or fire unfigured whence a voice issuing forth, or light abundant whizzing and winding about the earth, but also to see a horse more glittering than light, or a boy on thy shoulders riding on a horse, or fiery, or adorned with gold, or divested, or shooting, or standing on thy shoulders. If thou speakest often to me, thou shalt see absolutely that which is spoken, for then neither appears the celestial concave bulk, nor do the stars shine, the light of the moon is covered. I guess they're talking about an eclipse here. The earth stands not still, but all things appear and thunders. Invoke not the self-conspicuous image of nature, for thou must not behold these before thy body is initiated. What an interesting comment. When soothing souls, they have always reduced them from these mysteries. Okay, certainly out of the cavities of the earth spring terrestrial dogs, which show no true sign to mortal man. Labor about the hecatic. I wonder if this kind of means hectic or something. The hecatic Strophilos never change barbarous names, for there are names in every nation given from God, which have an unspeakable power in rights. Then thou seest a sacred fire without form, shining flashingly through the depth of the world. Hear the voice of fire. God. But God is he that hath the head of a hawk. He is the first, indestructible, eternal, begotten, indivisible, dissimilar, the dispenser of all good, incorruptible, the best of the good, the wisest of the wise. He is the father of equity and justice, self-taught, physical, and perfect and wise, and the only inventor of the sacred philosophy. And there you go. So there you go. That sounds a heck of a lot like Egyptian right here. The head of a hawk, right? Osiris. I think that's what it is. Or no, Ra. I don't know. Well, either way, here you go. Yet another. Now this is kind of interesting. And I'm going to bring this back on another, when we do, I'm going to connect this with something else when I do a reading of a translation I did about the Phoenicians in the Isle of Haiti in America. He cites this particular fragment here. So let's read the Periplus of Hanno. This is very interesting. The Voyage of Hanno, commander of the Carthaginians. Round the parts of Libya behind the pillars of Hercules, which he deposited in the temple of Saturn, was decreed by the, Cronus, it was decreed by the Carthaginians that Hanno should undertake a voyage beyond the pillars of Hercules and found a Libya-Phoenician cities. He sailed accordingly with 60 ships of 50 oars each and a body of men and women to the number of 30,000 in provisions and other necessaries. When he had passed the pillars on our voyage, he had sailed beyond them for 2 days. He founded the first city, which was named Themiaterium. Below it lay an extensive plain. Proceeding thence towards the west, he came to Solois, a promontory of Libya, a place thickly covered with trees, where we erected a temple of Neptune, and again proceeded for the space of a half a day towards the east until we arrived at a lake lying not far from the sea and filled the abundance of large reeds. Here elephants and a great number of other wild beasts were feeding. Having passed the lake about a day's sail, we founded cities near the sea called Cariconticus and Gite and Acra and Melita and Arambis. Thence we came to the great river Lixus, which flows from Libya. On its banks the Lixitae, a shepherd tribe, were feeding flocks, amongst whom we continued some time on friendly terms. Beyond the Lixitae dwelt the inhospitable Ethiopians, who pasture a wild country intersected by large mountains, from which they say the river Lixus flows. In the neighborhood of the mountains lived the Troglodytae, men of various appearances, whom the Lixitae described as swifter in running than horses. I hope you're paying attention to that. Men of various appearances here, okay? So they're not just telling you they're all one race. Having procured interpreters from them, We coasted along a desert country towards the south 2 days. Thence we proceeded towards the east, the course of a day, where we found in a recession in a desert bay a small island containing a circle of 5 stadia, where we settled a colony and called it Cern, or Cerny, or yeah. We judged from our voyage that this was a place lay in a direct line with Carthage, for the length of our voyage from Carthage to the pillars was equal to that from the pillars to Cern. We then came to a lake which we reached by sailing up a river called the Tretis or Cretis. This lake had 3 islands larger than Cern or Cerny, from which proceeding a day's sail, we came to the extremity of the lake that was overhung by large mountains, inhabited by savage men clothed in skins of wild beasts, who drove us away by throwing stones and hindering us from landing. Sailing thence, we came to another river that was large and broad and full of crocodiles and river horses, whence returning back we came again to Cern. Thence we sailed towards the south, 12 days coasting the shore, the whole of which is inhabited by Ethiopians who would not wait our approach, but fled from us. Their language was not intelligible even to the Lixite who were with us. Towards the last day, we approached some large mountains covered with trees, the wood of which was sweet-scented and variegated. Having sailed by these mountains for 2 days, we came to an immense opening of the sea, on each side of which, towards the continent, was a plain, from which we saw by night fire arising at intervals in all directions, either more or less. Having taken in water there, we sailed forward 5 days near the land until we came to a large bay, which our interpreters informed us was called the Western Horn. And this was a large island, and in the island a saltwater lake, and in this another island, where when we had landed we could discover nothing but a daytime except trees. We could discover nothing in the daytime except trees, but in the night we saw many fires burning and heard the sounds of pipes, cymbals, drums, and confused shouts. We were then afraid, and our diviners ordered us to abandon the island. Sailing quickly away, thence we passed a country burning with fires and perfumes, and streams of fire supplied from it fell into the sea. The country was impassable on the account of the heat. Sounds like a volcano. We sailed quickly thence, being much terrified, and passed on for 4 days. We discovered at night a country full of fire. In the middle was a lofty fire, larger than the rest, which seems to touch the stars. It definitely sounds like a volcano. When the day came, we discovered it to be a large hill called the Chariot of the Gods. Yep, volcano. On the 3rd day after our departure thence, having sailed by those streams of fire, we arrived at the bay called the Southern Horn, at the bottom of which lay an island like the former, having a lake, and in the lake another island, full of savage people, the greater part of whom were women, whose bodies were hairy, and whom our interpreters called gorillae. I guess that this actually might be actual gorillas that they're getting confused about. Though we pursued the men, we could not seize any of them, but all fled from us, escaping from the precipices and defending themselves with stones. 3 women were, however, taken, but they attacked their conductors with their teeth and hands and could not be prevailed upon to accompany us. Having killed them, we flayed them and brought their skins back with us to Carthage. Jesus. We did not sail further on, our provisions failing us. Okay, so there you go. They killed the gorillas and took their skins back to Carthage. The end. All right, and that's the end of that book, right? Yeah, it sure is. Okay, so I will come back and do another kind of addendum to this because, like I said, I have another book. Let me just put up this sign here. Fragments down here. There we go. I do have another book that I am going to be reading, and that's going to have some more stories, some more fragments. And I think I'm guessing that when he actually finally published this book, it was fairly successful, and then they decided to add in a whole bunch more stuff. So this is great. And the next one we'll do is going to have a lot more of the Exodus type stories. So we're going to have Exodus stories from I think 4 or 5 different types of civilizations. And again, this is going to be really just a continuation of studying ancient history and seeing that it doesn't coincide with Bible history, which is what they all seem to, one of the things, all historians in the past are always trying to connect it with the Bible, and that's always, it's a bone of contention with me when I read old history books, because they're constantly referring to things like in terms of like the way, in terms of the Bible itself, which I think is just wrong. Yes, there are there are real things in the Bible that are probably historically accurate, but there's so much of it that isn't, and we don't really know which is and which isn't. We don't know as far as like the chicken and the egg situation. You know what I'm saying? Like what came first? Did the flood stories of the Chaldeans come first, or the Babylonians, or was that written somewhere else? And and then you have, I don't know. There's a lot here to kind of play with and to look into, and I think this is a really cool book, and I think it definitely pries open a little bit of the truth for us. And so I hope you guys enjoyed that. I'm gonna be, like I said again, we'll be doing I'll call it a part three or whatever. And I'll see which other elements that there are that might have been added on to it. It's kind of different in format than this book. This book, he does this whole preface, and then he just gives you the writings. The other one, he kind of has prefaces, I think, before each chapter. So I'll have to take a look and bookmark some stuff to make it a good stream. So otherwise, if you guys liked it, please hit the like button. Share if you think other people will think this is cool. I mean, I think this is really interesting, and boy, did we read some really interesting accounts. And it makes you wonder what's really the real history here. And then also a good point is that I mean the amount of hieroglyphs on these Egyptian temples, if you add them all up, is thousands upon thousands upon thousands of pages of writing that has never been deciphered. Who knows what is written on these walls? And it's no mistake, I think, that nobody bothered ever actually translating them, if they can even translate them at all, if they claim they can translate them. But if they can, why wouldn't you have done that? I wonder, if not to hide the truth and the past and the actual history. So, I don't know. I'm just throwing out questions here. You guys can think what you want. And otherwise, thank you so much. I hope you guys like the new audio setup. I did get a mixer, and I am using a professional mic I already own. It's not necessarily for this kind of stuff, but it works, I think, pretty good. So let me know in the comments if the sound sounds good to you guys, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.